Welcome to another Bit by Bit. I am Ben Beharin, joined by my colleague Carolina Mililesi. How are you doing, Carolina?
I am good. I'm stuck in Vegas where I was for Dell Tech World. And when you have 7 meetings in a day, maybe taking the red eye home is not the best thing. So I'm here an extra day than I wanted to.
Well, hopefully getting some R&R. I know you had meetings, but maybe some shopping therapy.
It's Vegas.
It's Vegas. Okay, so we're talking Copilot plus PCs. We have talked about AI PCs before. There is now a new category which we should talk about. Is that does that make sense to not say AI PC, but a category of new computers called Copilot Plus PCs? But I was at the event. You followed the event by from afar. You were obviously at Dell. Dell talked about it because Dell is launching Copilot PCs, kind of across their portfolio, actually.
Yeah, the
Um,
broadest portfolio.
yeah, I mean, I can't remember another time where I've seen Dell ship another product not named Intel across their entire portfolio at launch. So that felt compelling. But I'll sort of just lob out a thought, and then you sort of carry it on. There's a discussion about the AI platform shift, and I think there's a lot of people making this very specific wording because I do think they want to make the point that um, AI is a platform, right? It's not just a
Mhm.
feature. Now we could argue whether it is a feature, but I think they're trying to come out and say, if you think of this as a platform, then that means people will build on your ecosystem,
Right.
and platforms are good ways to kind of build moats and have strategic advantage. But I think that the problem I have with that, and this is both good and bad, is that what's essentially happening with Copilot PCs and kind of this AI platform shift is actually a schism, right? Because we have talked about before, one of the great reasons to have AI running on the servers and then using client software is that it just works on everything. Every piece of hardware I have today. However, people are starting to make this claim, and Copilot PCs are one of them. There's a technical reason to do this, but it requires new hardware to get all of these new AI features. And so that's why I think they want to land this idea that it's a platform shift so that this fuels a new AI platform. But it's not how people were thinking about this, right? I don't think people were really thinking that it was going to be a true schism. I can't get that on existing hardware. I think when you talk to AI PCs, it was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll be able to do all of this with my 1 year old PC. And unfortunately, that's not the case. So high level, that's just kind of why I think using AI platform shift language matters. But I also think people are asking a lot of questions about this that they really weren't, just a few weeks ago.
Well, I think that links to the difficulty to explain to people the difference between cloud and on device, right? We talked about this before because that's what you're linking your statement to, that the idea of running in the cloud then allows me to do whatever I want across all my devices through an app or a service. And that's not the case when you're talking about Copilot Plus. And how are you, I think from an enterprise perspective is going to be easier, right? Because it will be somewhat dictated by whatever your organization is going to allow you to do. But from a consumer perspective is where it's going to become a little tricky to know, the level of service, even if you're thinking about Copilot, that you're going to get on a Copilot Plus PC versus another PC, even if it's a new one that doesn't have that label, because the number of tops are not the ones that Microsoft is putting
Right.
in the spec of the product, right? So that I think is where the story becomes a little complicated. And then if you add that the fact that you're going to have more than just Qualcomm in the market, that story becomes even more complicated. So
Right. Right. And I think this is, I've thought about this as just an opportunity for Microsoft to really modernize Windows in a way they couldn't before. In fact,
100%.
and the thing that I was, I know we've talked about this a ton between ourselves, so this is us then talking out in terms of publicly. But my takeaway from seeing the event, seeing the vendor ecosystem being there, and really just seeing the state of Windows, like you could really argue that Windows is in the best position it's really ever been, like the healthiest state it's been in, and really Microsoft is driving so much of that. They're really in control of the ecosystem, and you're seeing that from cloud to client. And so to me, that's a positive. I think people who use these machines are going to see really a drastic look and feel with Windows. Really, and the battery life for all these new Copilot machines is going to be really like nothing you've seen on Windows before. So I think that's a great opportunity. But I think people again are going to have to realize, this is new hardware, right? This is something that requires a new laptop in order to take advantage of, but all the benefits that come with it is because the ecosystem's healthier and Microsoft has truly modernized Windows in a way they couldn't have before, if everything was going to be backwards compatible.
Yeah, and I think that linked to that is why we see Microsoft be as hands-on, so to speak, as they are today from a platform perspective, from an OS perspective, is really that a lot is riding on this, not just from a Windows point of view, but all the capabilities and what, especially from an enterprise perspective, will be the ramification for Azure and cloud as well as client. And so if you're thinking
Right.
about all, the different 365 applications and the backend integration in an enterprise space, that so much of this is riding on the new hardware and what Microsoft's trying to land. And that's never been the case with Windows. Yes, Windows was powering all the PCs that were in the install base, but that was it really. Like there wasn't. And so although maybe we're not quite to where Satya wants people to love Windows, we are definitely at a point where I think with AI, the level of engagement that users, whether they're consumer or enterprise user, are going to have with Windows-based PC is going to be way higher than it's ever been before. And there's definitely going to be, the way that we talk about it, a level of delight in the interactions that as a user I'm going to have with Windows-based PCs.
Yeah. And what's been really interesting too is, I mean, they had a lot more software demos, really than I thought, right? Of people optimizing their apps. They had, Adobe, they had CapCut, they had a whole slew of examples where, like, you really did see the power of bringing AI at a whole new level to that software, and how fast it was when it was running on device. And again, not taking up all the great battery life that's coming to this. So I took also a little bit of optimism that people are going to start developing perhaps a new classification of apps. And I think that was really the message that they really wanted to get to, right? Windows, not just Azure, but Windows itself is also a great place to build these next generation AI
Yeah.
apps. Take your vision, everything you want to build, creativity, productivity enhancements, whatever it is, and build it on Windows. And then we're unleashing all this new hardware that can take advantage of that. Whether you want to do it on device or on the cloud. And I thought that was a
Or
powerful
hybrid, right?
moment to
Because
make that. Right.
there are going to
Right.
be
Hybrid.
developers that are looking at this from a hybrid perspective and allow you to do, some parts of the experience in the cloud and parts in on the edge. And I think that's why is even more excited for Microsoft. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see at WWDC in a few weeks how Apple is going to respond to that from a developer perspective.
Right, right. But that's why I think it's interesting, kind of the point that we led off with, which is if you think about this as an AI platform shift, then you're going to think about it as coming to operating systems, or really all in the same, right? That our operating systems
Right.
become infused with AI. So if I was writing to iOS, if I'm writing to Android, if I'm writing to, whatever. But that's where Microsoft really wants to push that advantage, which is that, well, sure, they've got an operating system, but they also have one of the leading cloud platforms to write and run AI workloads for, and that just creates a really super interesting dynamic. So it was weirdly weirdly positive around build. Like we hadn't been there in a while. I know you and I have attended several others. This was like a very different build in terms of energy, and the developers that I talked to who could really see the vision of writing new classification of apps. So, in fact, and then Sam Alt was on stage, and he had made this point, which I know we've thought about before, that he basically said, this may be the best time to really be a software developer. And he said, I recognize mobile was a big moment, as was the internet, but this is very different. Like, we're really talking about a whole new level of empowering people with software to get more done, to be more useful in their daily lives. And that's is very, I do think it's good to think about that, but also we're in uncharted territory.
Yeah, but one of the conversations that I was having at Dell this week was around, people still thinking about the killer app, right, for AI PCs or Copilot Plus PCs, whichever one you want to think of. And my answer to that is always that if you think about it in that way, you're missing the forest for the tree, right? And to your point, the forest is that shift in platform. And to me, is the ability for every user to really become more of a power user, to have AI take the friction away from the interaction that you have. And I talked about this when I was writing about DM4 and the iPad. I do think that this, I agree with you, is the best way for Microsoft to modernize Windows. I mean, there's been, already progress with Windows 11, but it still felt in some way old and heavy as an OS, right? Especially when
Yes.
you compare it to not necessarily the Mac, but comparing it to iOS and Android, and what most consumers and enterprise users, for that matter, are used and want to interact with. So I do think that AI allows that modernization, as well as allows for users to take fully advantage of a PC. And I think in the process, if that lands well, there's opportunity for higher
Right.
ASPs in the market.
Right. And I think that was really the framing that Satya Nadella had given several times. He gave it on Monday at the Copilot Plus event, and then in his kickoff, where he basically said, in the history of using computers, you had to know how to use them. Like, if you didn't know the operating system, the ins and outs to make it work best for you, the syntax of using software, you just weren't going to get as much out of it. And I think his fundamental point is that this opens the doors for, one, making it exactly easier, like you said, but then leading to this kind of, I guess, AI agents or AI assistants, whatever we want to call them, that it also gets to know you. So it's going to adapt its usages, right? Help you write things in your wording or
Yeah.
your tone. Like, that's I mean, weird, but at the same time, that's the vision they're trying to sell, is that
I
you're
mean,
basically gonna have superpowers with computers now in ways that you never did before, unless you were an absolute power user.
and truly making the PC personal, right? Because I still argue that, the personal computer ain't that personal right
Yeah.
now, right? And I think, because yes, I can personalize the look and feel, but that's not the point. The point is that you want a machine that knows you and is able to adapt to you versus you adapting to the piece of
Yeah.
technology that you're using. There was one piece of negative kind of discourse out there, and I think we should address it, because it is part of that personalization and getting to know you, and that was recall, and the fact that people started to get freaked out by the idea that recall is, indexing and watching every keystroke on the machine, and I think that the wording of is watching you is what is kind of get people freaked out. That's not kind of what it is. But it is important to say that if you don't want it, you don't have to have it, right? There's something that you, or in an organization, your IT manager, can turn off. Is also something that you can decide what you want to run on. So if there are certain apps that you don't want recall to have access to, you can actually live them out. But at the end of the day, I think is because people don't understand how useful this thing can be
Yeah.
in basically being your, your computer memory, if you like, to give you access to things that you might not remember.
Yeah.
I think where it gets maybe tricky is when you're interacting with somebody else, like, something that we are doing now, where I think it would be good if there was a way to disclose whether or not, a call or an interaction
Right.
is captured.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think Microsoft wanted the story to get across that this is all happening on device. So Microsoft is not seeing any of this. And again, I
Correct.
acknowledge that that there's a huge amount of value with that. And I think people have to reconcile the same sort of thing, right? Is that do you really trust then that these things truly are secure, right? In these features, I think this will adapt too. Like somebody brought up, well, um, what if it was tied to Windows Hello so that if it didn't know that it was me visually logging in, you couldn't use recall, right? If somebody else logged in with my
Right.
PIN because they had it. Or maybe in the future, it's smart enough to distinguish visually what a password is. And so even if you go back and look at it, it's hidden until you re enter your password, right? Kind of like the way that iOS does this with passwords. You can't, no one, even if I've logged into my phone, I can't go get my passwords. I have to re-log in with my
Re-log
password
in, yeah.
to get my passwords. And it hides them, right? So maybe it gets smart with that because that's where people are like, well, what if it sees my banking information, or what if it's like, and I get that,
Correct.
but it really is all on device, and so I think people will understand that. But you're right about the usefulness, and we don't have these machines. I tried it, but I do have a similar app that's been on Mac OS for a long time called
Yeah,
Rewind,
same.
and
Rewind.
I
Yeah.
use that all the time. I mean, I used it for a host of actually both those events because it was capturing transcripts in real time, and I was able to go back and take those transcripts and copy and paste things that they were saying for stuff we were writing or for my own notes. And it was super useful to have something hearing, maybe seeing and observing that you could go back to because again, like we multitask like crazy, and my memory is not amazing, and to
Yeah, I noticed that since you've been using Rewind, I tell you less, but you don't listen to me. So yeah, it is
it's,
useful.
I should see then
The
it
level
should
of friction.
then yeah then it should learn. It should always be like, don't say that. Carolina had told you this 3 weeks ago that this was the thing. So, but I think it'll be good. And there's other, but that's the hero feature. So I think everybody's gonna hone in on that. The creative
Yeah.
draw stuff, was clever too. It really made a great demo. But I think it's also safe to assume that Microsoft has a roadmap of features that they will bring that include this level of sort of functionality and increasing of AI experiences on these devices. So that will be good. Um, it's also worth briefly just sort of helping educate on this whole NPU thing. One, because we did a report on this, so if you haven't seen it,
Yes.
please go to our website and look at our NPU report. But this was the real kind of schism, right? This is the thing where Microsoft's trying to say there's a reason why you need all new hardware, and that all new hardware is this little neural processing unit that's sort of the latest and greatest bit on the SoC. And the point is that you can run these workloads on NVIDIA, RTX graphics cards. NVIDIA keeps trying to say these things. You could probably run them on Intel CPUs and AMD CPUs and GPUs. What's going to happen though is your battery's not going to last very long. It might last half the amount of time it even lasts today to run all these AI workloads in the background because of how much energy that takes in compute. And that's really what this NPU brings to the table. It's able to run all these AI workloads at very tiny wattage. In a lot of cases, less than 5 watts. Most cases, 1 to 2 watts, which is just a trickle of your battery life. And so I think it's important for people to understand that the trade off would have been you'd have awful battery life. Bringing all
And a
these
very hot
features
machine.
and a very hot machine, and a super loud fan. Like, how much do you love your
Yeah.
fan going on? Well, run AI in the background and good luck with your fan. Like, you're basically gonna heat your room and have a loud fan that nobody wants to be around you. So I think that's just, I don't want to make sure people don't miss that, because the value really is, you're going to get all these features and you're still actually going to have stellar battery life, right? On the Qualcomm products, in some cases, they're saying north of 20 hours.
Yeah.
So that's significant. So I'll make my peace with that. Go read our report, but this is to help you have amazing battery life on Windows and get all these AI features, and that's the role of the NPU.
And I think it's important to explain this because I think historically, we have to be honest, both the OEMs and the silicon vendors have kind of tried to get people to upgrade, telling a story that maybe wasn't always as close to reality, not to say honest, that it is in this case. My point being, there is a reason why you need new hardware, and it's the NPU. And to your point that you just explained, this is why you need the NPU. So this is not just an excuse to get a super cycle or push a refresh cycle. This is really how you get to a world where your PC is really empowered with AI.
Yeah.
And it's something that maybe from a user perspective is still hard to explain because we haven't seen all the use cases, and it is very personal. So it is not back to the killer app. It's not that thing that you see and it's like, wow. It's when it's going to make a difference to you, either in lowering your friction level, saving you time, enriching what you're doing, that is really going to kind of have the penny drop, and people are going to realize the value.
Yeah, yeah, and the one thing I think is going to be, and who knows if this alone helps. And I don't think there's a super cycle coming. I
No,
do
I
think
don't
it's worth
either.
mentioning that there's a ton of really old Windows 10 machines out there in the enterprise and in the consumer market. Like, we're going on 5 years in a lot of cases, which is a long time for Windows. Um, I think the hope is those folks are enticed to upgrade, and I really think one of the stronger stories is going to be battery life, because that's the one thing that I am really confident. You get one of these machines, you're going to have life-changing battery life in Windows for the first time, and we know that's been a big reason why a lot of people have come to the Mac. Whether they loved Mac OS or wanted those features, they just knew, I don't got to worry about my battery. And people hate worrying about their battery with their laptops. And so I'm super confident that that's going to be an experience that just translates universally across these hardware. Once other people try the AI features, we'll see it. But I think the battery life story alone is going to kick a lot of people into refreshing some of their machines.
And I agree with you that there's not going to be a super cycle, but I do think that the engagement level with PCs is going to grow and then settle, in terms of, if you're looking at what happened during COVID and all the stories and conversation we've had of consumers and user returning to love their PCs and engage
Right.
and all of that. The big concern was, okay, what happens when you start to be more mobile again? And you're going back on your phone. A lot of times, to your point, is because you cannot trust to have a machine without having to drag your power cord with you for the whole day. And so you do use other devices now that you don't have to worry about that, plus the added value add of AI. I do think that engagement is going to continue to grow. And that is, at the end of the day, what PC OEMs need to go after, because that will maintain a
Yeah.
replacement cycle, right? Will keep users
Right.
where they need to be, which is on the PC. Now, whether or not AI is shortening or lengthening the cycle is where people are still not sure.
Right.
Whether it is, through software that you're going to continue to see value and therefore, you're not shortening the cycle, or you're going to see more tops and more capability coming as the next generation of NPUs come to market.
Yeah. And the next time, bit by bit, we'll do will probably be after Apple's WWDC. So we are all super excited to see if and what Apple does in this space. I think we again know they're never going to call it an AI PC, but there's been enough rumblings from management on sort of these last few calls that something's coming in generative AI. So it'll be really interesting to compare kind of Microsoft's approach with Apple's. Are they similar? Are they super different? That'll be fun. So the next one of these we will see, compare, contrast, analyze what Apple's got
Well, and
going.
that would be right after Computex.
Yeah. Oh,
And so it's
juicy,
going to be a love fest of,
juicy.
yeah,
It's going to be a meaty
of
one.
AI PCs. Yes, everybody's having a keynote.
Everybody,
So
everybody wants to talk AI PCs, Copilot PCs, NPUs, silicon, blah blah blahs. So June. So look out for that episode in mid June, and we'll talk to you all then. Thanks for listening.